I'm the sports professor, Rick Horrow. Welcome to Beyond the Scoreboard, Inside the Mega Events. It's a $1 trillion sports business, to be sure, and about 50 to 60% of those dollars are wrapped up in the mega events, the championships, Super Bowls, All-Star Games, World Series, Wimbledon, tennis majors, golf majors, NASCAR championships, IndyCar championships, Ryder Cup. All of those too numerous to mention. I'm in my office to kick off the show, but I'm not here a lot. I'll be on the road on a weekly basis to bring you the inside tips from those major events. The balance sheets, who wins, who loses, the interviews, how you put on the events, and how you sustain them. This is all brought to you by Edelman Financial.
Money doesn't come with instructions. That's why we created Edelman Financial Services to help you with everything from college and retirement planning to managing your investments, helping you achieve retirement security. We're among the nation's top financial advisors. Come see how we can help you.
Welcome everybody to Drexel 2020, the evolving sports business market. We are fortunate this morning to be hosting some titans from the sports industry for a panel discussion, and I will be handing it over to them in a moment. But first, I wanted to thank some people for making this event possible. First, I would like to thank Joe Favorito, a member of our Sport Management Advisory Board, and a titan in the sports industry in his own right, who brought this opportunity to us. Without Joe's recognition of the value this panel discussion would bring to our students, we wouldn't be here today. So thank you, Joe. Second, I would like to acknowledge Casimir Jenkins, the Department Manager for Sport Management. Casimir has worked tirelessly on the logistics of this event, from securing the room space, to marketing the event, to organizing the catering, to arranging for the live streaming today. So thank you, Kaz. Speaking of live streaming and social media, it's hashtag Drexel 2020. Next, I would like to thank our department head, Dr. Joel Maxey, and the Dean of the LeBeau College of Business, Dr. Paul Jensen, for providing us with the resources to host today's event. Finally, I would like to thank our hosts, the Drexel University Sport Management Council, which is a student-run organization dedicated to providing educational opportunities for Drexel students interested in pursuing careers in sport management. The timing of today's panel discussion and the release of Rick's book could not be better. There are more career opportunities in the sports business than ever before. While many of the traditional career paths in sports still exist, such as ticket sales, sponsorships, event management, facility management, and public relations, developments that have transpired in the past 5 to 10 years have created new career paths. Things like cord cutting and how that has impacted the way we consume sports, and the use of data to inform decisions in sport, both on the field and in the business office. More recently, the rapid growth and acceptance of esports. In fact, I just heard announced today that Wells Fargo Center will be hosting the Overwatch League Championship this year. The growth and acceptance of esports in the sport ecosystem and the widespread legalization of sports gambling have created and will continue to create new opportunities for those wishing to enter the sport business. With that as a backdrop, I'd like to introduce Rick Horrow, whose new book, The Sport Business Handbook, is the catalyst for this event. Rick is the CEO of Horrow Sports Ventures and has been the architect of over 100 deals worth more than $13 billion in sports and other urban infrastructure projects. Often referred to as the sport professor, Rick also serves as the sports business analyst for CNN, Westwood One, Fox Sports Radio, and CBS Sportsline. Prior to the Sports Business Handbook, Rick authored several other books, including Beyond the Scoreboard, An Insider's Guide to the Business of Sport, and When the Game is on the Line, from the man who brought the Heat to Miami and the Browns back to Cleveland. Rick is also a graduate of Harvard Law School. So now, please join me in welcoming Rick Horrow and our panelists. Rick will introduce our panelists and lead our discussion today.
great entrepreneurial program at Drexel. Thank you all for your vision, and thank you for giving the students a real firsthand opportunity to learn from present company excluded icons in the field and learning about the experience over the last 50 years. Imagine getting in the room with the most influential people in the history of sport business and together to discuss things just one-on-one. The biggest names you can imagine: commissioners, owners, developers, entrepreneurs. Pour an executive a beer and ask him to tell you a story, or her, about what he or she sees as the biggest trends in the sports business. Candid insights, hard advice, no-nonsense tips. That, in a nutshell, is what the Sport Business Handbook contains. The greatest collection of sport business professionals assembled under one roof or one book. And they're sitting in your conference room, imagine, ready for you to look at them as needed. The sports industry has grown exponentially in the last 50 years. I'd like to think that I had a little bit in that roughly 50 years ago. Don't try the math, it doesn't really work. But in the late 70s, I was at Harvard Law School being challenged by generating some fake excitement about corporate tax, real estate, and other aspects of law, and befriended a professor, a criminal law professor, named Jim Vornberg. Jim was and had been a trusted friend in the business, and Jim claimed at the time that it was great to have you be involved and be interested in sports, but quote unquote, there's no such thing as sports law. We don't do sports law. So the interesting dynamic was, long story short, if you win a squash game that we play, you'll be able to have me be a normal dedicated student and take corporate tax and all the other kind of things that we'll be doing on a regular basis. If I win, then you're going to write me a hall pass to Gillette Stadium and TD Waterhouse Garden, the old Boston Garden, the Bruins and the Celtics and the Red Sox, and I'd write a thesis about excessive sports violence. The rub was two things. One is I enlisted the help of a good friend to become a squash coach, never played squash before, and then my roommate at Harvard Law, who just so happens to be John Roberts, the Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court. Interesting story number one. Interesting story number two, the professor, by the way, was 81 years old when we played. And of course, the first message that I have to everybody in the room is stoop to nothing to get where you want to be. So at the end of the day, we put together a paper that ended up being a thesis, the first ever thesis at Harvard Law School, and then 3 books helping to define the field of sports law and sports business. And one of the things that we really want to do nationally is to begin to celebrate the 50 years of the sports business all over the country. And this is really one of the first stops after a debut at Harvard Law, Harvard Business School 4 weeks ago. So thank you for being part of history, and thank you for making this a major event. The big change for me, before we go to the panelists, is that years ago, 4 things about the industry that are important today. Number one, it was the Wild West back then. A friend of mine, Bob Ruxin, who wrote a book called The Athlete's Guide to Agents, said 30, 40 years ago that the only qualification for you to be an agent was for you to find some poor athlete who called you an agent. Well, it's changed a little bit, but not that much. Today, it's a lot more structured, but if you're entrepreneurial, you could do anything and do it well and rise above if you had the traits to be a successful deal maker, human being, partner, etc. So that's really important. Second, every aspect of the sport business today is scrutinized. 60%, according to an LA Times study last year, of all column inches devoted to sports today are not what you would define as X's and O's, but are deal making, sport law, sport business, sport management, sports politics, sports sociology, sports anthropology, sports data delivery, as Tony will tell you a little bit about Turnkey. All of those are newfound areas where years ago, if you said sport business, you would be in a track where people would think that you were being taught or you were going to be bored. Today, obviously, it is the dominant part of all of sports. Third, labels of sport defy traditional analysis. Your sport business club, your sport business folks, if you have the core knowledge of what you need to do to succeed, it's just as easy to translate that knowledge into issues of law, issues of marketing, issues of deal making, management. The common sports fact patterns are almost the most important issue of how to drive it. Don't get me wrong. I'm not suggesting that if you want to practice law, you don't need a law degree, you ought to go to business school. But for the most part, these are times where you can understand how important the diversity is and how far it'll get you. And then finally, the sports industry is defined by changing circumstances. PricewaterhouseCoopers did a recent study that said media rights will be up $24 billion by 2022, sponsorships up 3.8%, licensing up 4.5%, and tickets only 2.2%. Tony will tell you a little bit more about media rights of these guys from their perspective. But one of the things that has emerged is that things have flipped on their heads. Years ago, you'd buy a back of a ticket, it would be paper, you get to sit there and maybe go get a beer. Today, when you look at the numbers are entirely changing. Globalization is part of it as well. Obviously, there are major issues here. So when you think about where the business has gone, it's changed a lot. Almost 50 years ago, by the way, we had the Broad Street Bullies here in Philadelphia, which redefined the way hockey was perceived on a global scale. 58 years ago, Franklin Field, a few blocks away, the ABC Wide World of Sports debuted, spanning the globe. Do y'all, this is hard demographically, we remember it. Does anybody remember Wide World of Sports? See, 2 people, 3 people. We're getting old, man. No, not
You
us.
remember.
Not us. Wide World of Sports, and by the way, the first event, I don't know if anybody remembers, the first event that was covered on Wide World of Sports, the Penn Relays, right across the street. So very interesting perspective how things have evolved. You've heard a lot from me. One of the things that's interesting from our perspective is that we are doing a national tour of this book and celebrating the 50-year history of the sports business. We're going to 30 cities across North America with the help of all of our contributors, many of whom are owners of teams, commissioners, leagues, marketing people, and otherwise. But the one thing that is clear, every community treasures its sports history and sports marketing, and every community remembers its 50 greatest sports moments. And we'll talk about those as well. And thanks to some of the participation from the students here, we have an opportunity to ask these folks questions about what they thought in the industry, what kind of advice as well, and where they're coming from also. Nick Sikevich, Tony Ponturo, and John Butler, I'll get specific with each of them, but let's start with Nick with a couple of points. I wanted to read part of Nick's highlights straight out of the book because Nick was involved with the Red Bulls Stadium, involved with the Philadelphia Union, not just involved, but basically built the stadiums, MLS person, and now he is directly involved in the National Lacrosse League. He was chosen in 2016 as the commissioner of the National Lacrosse League, founding executive of Major League Soccer, New Jersey Red Bulls, AEG, but he's transcended soccer and transcended lacrosse. So, Nick Sikevich.
Thanks, Rick.
Nick, give me your elevator speech about basically getting into the business, driving 2 major sports to next levels, commonalities, differences. I mean, you've had some experiences nobody else had in at least two areas and maybe more. So give the audience a little idea of your background and how you got here, and give me kind of your secrets of success.
Yeah, so I'm a glutton for really tough projects that other people say can't be done. So I was a soccer goalie in the 80s, played professionally for 6 years, retired because there was no money to be made in soccer, and went into banking. I was in the credit card business when the World Cup came here in '94, and off the World Cup was the startup of Major League Soccer. I gotten a call through a former coach of mine that said, hey, they're looking for business executives to help start this professional soccer league. So in 1996, along with this gentleman here, with Budweiser and Anheuser-Busch, launched Major League Soccer in 1996. And I joined, I left the credit card business, not quite as exciting as sports, and I've loved a tremendous career building Major League Soccer over 21 years, 2 stadiums, owned a piece of one team here at the very end of my 21-year run, and thought I was going to, essentially retire, maybe do some consulting with Mr. Horrow here on other stadium projects, but the National Lacrosse League came calling, and I looked at this product and said, wow, this is a new emerging sport, reminded me of a lot of soccer in the 80s in terms of growth. Our sport is Canadian born, and with lacrosse growing in the United States, it's dripping down south of the border. So what I think you'll find in this business is you can't schedule opportunity, and this was a great opportunity of a new emerging sport in the United States. So I became their 5th commissioner in 2016, and we're having a lot of fun.
And the owners are having a lot of fun under Nick's leadership, I can guarantee you. To be retained or selected to lead a league into their greatest period of growth, but a guy has had tremendous deal-making experience in building facilities and getting involved in other franchises, but self-admitted soccer guy, not a lacrosse guy. It was a risk that was well worth it for the owners. But how do you feel about walking into that room and explaining to owners that you either knew lacrosse and maybe wanted to fool them, or didn't know lacrosse and tell them that, look, it's not that important?
No, listen, I'm a pretty straight up guy. I don't BS anybody. So I was the soccer guy. I didn't know anything about lacrosse, but I knew a whole lot about building a league and building teams and building venues. And when people ask me, what's different between your job in soccer and your job in lacrosse now, and I say nothing. It's the same. You can transcend sports if you have proper, experience, and you're willing to continue learning too. Because, you should never think you know it all in this game, because you're only as good as your last game, which was either last week or last season, and you should keep learning. So I came into it, I was very upfront. I said, I'm not the lacrosse guy, but we can build a league, and what you need is the ability to find really good people and surround yourself with really good people. You need to motivate those people and have them build a plan, and then you need those people to execute brilliantly. And those are the 3 things that I write in your book, Rick, and that's kind of the secret sauce, if you will, but it's really not a secret sauce. It's people, quality people that work in a highly motivated team environment, building a plan. There's no plan that's perfect, but you build the best plan you can, and then just execute the heck out of it, and that's the secret sauce.
Well, and it is in the book, by the way, and this is not a shameless plug to buy the book. Believe me, you'll get that in a few minutes. But, his sidebar is really, it's entitled Process, People, Plan, and Careful Execution. And that's really been, at the risk of being a little redundant, your blueprint in every sport situation that you've been successful at?
Yeah, pretty much. It's, look, I'm not the smartest guy in the room, and I admit that, but I go find people a lot smarter than me, and things like finance and marketing and operations and team management and how to build stadiums. You know that firsthand, Rick. You were my first consultant on the Red Bull Arena project. So finding the people that fill your gaps and then highly motivating them and keeping them on task and executing on that plan, that's the secret sauce.
Quick quick lacrosse question. Though, obviously get back to you too. So the Wings are a big deal now in the league. You also moved your headquarters to Philly. Obviously a real tie to Philly, and Philly's a big lacrosse town, and Philly has become very important to you too.
Yeah, it's one of the great sports cities in America, fantastic history in the world, quite frankly. Built a stadium here, brought a soccer team here, and very proud to say we brought a lacrosse team here who launched this year. It was their first year here under Comcast Spectacor ownership, amazing owner, and they've had a phenomenal year, averaging well over 12,000 tickets a game and filling up Wells Fargo Center and creating a spectacular environment there. So it's been a great pleasure. And bringing the league office here, we were in New York. We were in the shadow of all the big leagues. We weren't relevant. We had a tiny little office on the backside of the NFL headquarters and just not relevant. Here, we're the only major professional sports league headquartered in Philadelphia, and we're able to be more relevant. And we have a flagship team that's owned by one of the great Fortune 500 companies, Fortune 40 company, actually, here at Comcast.
And yesterday I was at the game. I'm sure people don't want to think about the Toronto game last. By the way, it's a long series. You have 3 more games left, so don't even think about that as Sixers fans. But you have banners. Ed Snyder and the Flyers dominate, and of course Julius Erving and the Sixers dominate. But the Wings have a couple of banners up there. Welcome and congratulations and all that. So obviously a major commitment in the building.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, they treat that team as well as they treat their Flyers and all the other content that goes in that building. And it's all about ownership. I learned in Major League Soccer, if you have great owners that have deep resources and wealth and commitment, you could build a soccer league in a third world country. I played in the 80s. The soccer didn't even show up on the radar in the 80s, and today it's a major sport in the United States. If you have great owners that can stand the test of time and invest in the right strategies and the right people and the right plan and the execution, you'll eventually get there.
Nick, we'll be back to you. Clearly, the great-great-great-grandfather of sports marketing. How's that?
Nice.
Don't say anything yet. I want to finish. Tony Pontoro, a respected voice in sport media and marketing, more than respected. He spent 26 years at Anheuser-Busch, the last 17 as CEO of Busch Media Group, leading the in-house agency, we'll talk about that in a minute, for all media, sport, and entertainment activity for all beer and theme park brands. Not an insignificant job. Annually ranked in the top 20 most powerful people in sport and ranked 14th among Business Week's list of most prominent executives. As I said, I have no idea who the other 13 are, to be honest with you, and they're wrong. But Pontoro is a member of the Broadcasting and Cable Hall of Fame. Currently, Pontoro serves as Executive Vice President of Strategy for Turnkey Sports and Entertainment. And more important than any of that, he is one of the few really good guys in sport. Really old, but really good. Tony, how's that? Good morning.
Good morning. That was a good uplifter for
the students. You can tell our relationship. So what's it feel like reflecting back on, and I'm not puffing on this, basically creating the sports marketing business from a corporate perspective, and in essence, placing more sports marketing, sports corporate sponsorship orders than anybody who ever lived?
That's why I'm old, right?
Yeah.
So, what's amazing, and I went to Villanova up the street, graduated in the mid-70s, went to Anheuser-Busch when I was 30, coming out of ad agency work in New York. And in those days, Anheuser-Busch was really a very small beer company in St. Louis, Missouri. It was 3 brands, Budweiser, Michelob, and Busch, that had a 22 market share. And really didn't use sports or very little marketing. And our CEO, August Busch III, took over the company from his father and said, we're going to build this company and essentially use sports to do that. Now, we didn't just use sports because we thought that was a good idea. Obviously, what we were doing and understanding and today would have been much more extensive research that we do at Turnkey, is follow the consumer. Where is the consumer spending time? And that's going to be my theme as the marketer on this panel, is at the end of the day, and as those that are students, keep in the forefront that the consumer is going to guide you, whether you end up at a team or a league or a marketer, of where the trends are, where their interest is, how do they want to integrate with your asset, whether it's lacrosse or football or any kind of activity. That's the number one thing. So when I went to Anheuser-Busch, we always talked about it as it was a blank canvas. If you go back just for fun and go to a video library and look at a baseball game, a basketball game, a hockey game, you will not see as late as 1982 dasher boards, in ice, scores table, outfield walls. And how that started was and no one sponsored local teams. When I say no one, very little. And we would start knocking on doors and go to teams around this country and say, we want to be your beer sponsor. And there was no framework, there was no structure. And a team would go, well, let's see how dumb they are. We want $1 million for the beer sponsorship, and here's the assets you get. The one thing we prided ourselves on at Anheuser-Busch is doing the analytical work and the research to come back and say, well, we just took all those assets and we put our value on it, and it's $500,000. And we're not going to necessarily argue about the money, but if you want $1 million, you have to bring us value. And that became sort of, well, wait a minute, there's a sign in left field, or there's a wall in left field that's blank, and there's no signs on dasher boards, and there's no scores tables and all this. And we started filling in the picture and getting value, getting assets for that money. And that's how that really built. And then teams, soft drink, others started to follow that. So it had to start somewhere, and you'll see it today. And as technology explodes, whether it's esports or other things, is how does that canvas start to get painted, right? So that's how we did it, and over time, we at one point touched in some way in sponsorship 90% of every professional team in this country, and then we started doing it nationally. And Rick and I were talking before the session is 1984, which I talk about in the chapter of the book, was probably the first somewhat sophisticated sports marketing program. Peter Uberoff goes and gets the Olympics for Los Angeles as a private enterprise and had to raise the money in order to run the Olympics. And so sponsorship became key, and we at Anheuser-Busch came in for all of $10 million in those days. And then how do you then activate all that activity? And so ultimately, you now go to the end of 2008, we're spending $500 million a year in sports and entertainment. We went from 3 brands to 50 brands and a 50 market share. And then we got bought and a company called InBev is running the company today. It's still a big sports marketer. But it sort of built from the grassroots. And so then today, having produced a few sports shows, so shows you can keep evolving. So the good thing is age is good because you can keep evolving your career. And the one thing I would say to the younger folks is you start to make decisions. Don't think every decision is like forever. You know, you'll build a foundation. I did a play on Vince Lombardi. Vince Lombardi was a high school football coach until he was 37, right? He was building his foundation. He wasn't a head coach, which was the Green Bay Packers, till he was 47. He was an assistant at Fordham and West Point and the New York Giants. Thought he'd never be it. He finally becomes a head coach at 47, dies at 57, unfortunately, of colon cancer. But his legacy, and as many of you know, the Super Bowl trophies, the Lombardi Trophy, came from building those foundations of time and work. So the other message in there is that it's not fast track, and just keep doing all the right things. And so now at Turnkey, what we do is, with all the choices you have today in the business that you're going in, when I went into business, it was pretty simple. There was 3 television networks, ABC, NBC, CBS. It eventually became ESPN and satellite television, and then the internet, and then how technology has grown. So it's a much more sophisticated business. So from a marketer or a team or a league, you need research and data in order to understand what's working, what isn't, rather than just sort of hoping what you're doing is right. So that's sort of the support we're bringing to these entities, to let's make sure that your asset and your brand has the right image and awareness that you think it does. Let's make sure the consumer is interacting with you. We did some work for Coca-Cola, and one of the things we really spent time on is and this is for all marketers, is that if you are not integrating this next generation, I call it feeding the pipeline of the next consumer, the next audience. If you're not integrating and getting that consumer involved with all the technology and the social media and everything, you're gonna say, we're all gonna say, well, that's great that you, Budweiser, Coca-Cola, Geico, or FedEx are all great sponsors, and we know you make money and hopefully sell business with that, but how do we as the fan benefit from that? You know, bring us into the fabric of the game. Let us touch the game, be a part of that. And so those are going to be the things that you, the consumer, are going to demand from the marketers and the teams, because if you're going to spend time with something, with all the choices you have, you want to make sure that you're engaged. So that's a long sort of history of sort of where we went. The benefit that you all have is, when I came out of it with an economics degree, to my knowledge, there weren't any schools doing sports management programs.
Was there money back then?
Money.
Was there? Did they use money, or did they kind of trade coins for? Hey, sorry.
We used I didn't get that at first, but we traded apples and corn. And,
Thank you.
Hey, Rick, before you call John old, I just want to tell the audience here that there's no such thing as old or young.
Right.
Just good and bad.
That's very well done. That is worthy of a fortune cookie.
That's right.
It's worthy of and I will tell you, just stealing thunder, Tony Pontoro, after all of his comments, deserves to be on the Mount Rushmore of sports marketers. But you did say age is good, so let's remember that more than any other comment you've made today. Age is good. It fits all of us. Nick, maybe less of you, but only slightly less. So.
Well, I was saying to Rick earlier, as we improvise here, that experience is that, and I'll use myself, that I got hit by the 2x4, or I got hit by the locomotive coming down the track many times. That's what failure is, right? So failure is good because you learn from that experience. So now, if you're working with younger folks, you know, a person with experience can sort of see the locomotive coming down the track and say, you don't really see that coming, it's about to hit you and smash you. I can push you off the track and learn from that experience. But the other lesson in there is it's okay to fail because that's how you learn.
Yeah, and one other comment to kind of get to the other question for Tony now is that you ought to put in perspective what his job really was. I mean, you saw, and just kidding, that he had placed more orders than anybody in history, but when he took over this job at 30?
Correct.
There was no field. You had a company that was willing to allow Tony to take some reasonable risks, but he created this entire world of sponsorship, signage, for the most part. I mean, there were old signs in ballparks, but nothing like this. And so it's a combination of using the experience, it sounds like, making sure you're humble about knowing that you don't know everything, which is kind of what Nick was also saying too, but as well to take the risks but be bold in areas that you might not have known otherwise, right? And so that to me is the most enduring part of your message.
Yeah, it's and you need the management. So as you become leaders, you want to empower your people. I would guarantee you, all of us on the panel, even maybe included Rick, but all of you in the room, it's about, let me do my job, right? Empower me. That doesn't mean you don't pay attention to your leadership, but we all want to be given the chance to show what we have, right? We don't want to be suffocated and have our flame extinguished. And so you will get so much more out of people if you empower them, give them direction, give them some guideposts, but let people do their work. And so that is so key. The one thing that I just leave this part of it with, there's another question, is keep in mind that we're talking about consumer, that you are building your own brand. So even when you go into the classroom, your professors, whatever, you're building your brand, and when you go into the workplace, you will start to be identified as something, right? So think of brands that you like. Do you like your iPhone? Do you like a piece of clothing? Do you like, a soft drink? Do you like a beer? Whatever you may like. But you will start building your own brand. Are you trustworthy? Are you honest? Are you authentic? Or the opposite of that? Can you not be trusted? Are you sort of slick in a way? And understand what you want to be around. And that will generally be what people want to be around. But it's a very real thing, because I learned it after the $500 million wasn't there, is that the reputation now 10 years later and people working with you is as strong as when the money was there, because you built the brand of respect. And you want to do that starting right now.
And by the way, that doesn't happen with a lot of people. So again, kudos to Tony. But the 100 and some odd people that we interviewed, and they wrote the chapters and sidebars for the book. And then we started talking to other people in the industry about the critical mass of this book. And one of the things I found among peers is that they would say, "Oh yeah, I know him. He's a good guy. He's not. He's challenging. She's done a lot of different things." The personal relationship piece is the first thing out of people's mouths. Then what they've done in their career is second. So that's again confirmation. Very, very, very important. And Tony does it better than anybody. John Butler served as executive director of Pop Warner for 27 years. Is it still 27? Now?
Be 28 at the end of this month.
Dog years, 28. Introduced coaches education programs for volunteers on sporting behavior, coaching techniques, respect for youth. Seeing the need for athletes with special needs, he launched the Challenger Division flag football and cheerleading program to provide the Pop Warner experience to those athletes. In 2014, he was elected president of the National Sports Concussion Coalition and serves as vice president of the National Council of Youth Sports, on the advisory committee of Heads of Football, and on the board of SAFE, the nonprofit arm of Sports Turf Managers Association. John has an incredibly diverse career focusing on philanthropy, youth education, and doing the right thing. And John, just generally, first of all, honored that you're here, honored that you're involved in the book as well, and give us your perspective on kind of the business now, and give us a little elevator speech on your trek through that business.
Sure. Good morning. It's been an interesting ride, that's for sure. I was initially in the football equipment business, making blocking sleds and tackling dummies, and I coached high school football for 7 years here in the suburbs. And when the opportunity came along for a position with Pop Warner, and in the meantime, I had become a big brother through big brother, big sister. Excuse me. When the opportunity came along with Pop Warner, I immediately saw that as an opportunity to try to benefit kids, try to get kids more involved in healthy activities like youth football and cheerleading. And it has evolved that way. It's on the business side, it's interesting. Pop Warner is a nonprofit, and I offended a lot of people when I first took over. I said, we have to run this as a business, and they, oh no, we're a nonprofit. Nonprofit just means that the money you make goes back into the organization and the benefits you provide, not into somebody's pocket. You still have to at least break even, or the doors close, the lights go out, and you walk home. So it's been challenging in that sense, learning a lot about dealing with IRS regulations for nonprofits, which sometimes are bizarre, certainly circuitous, and layers on layers. But one of the things that people, and I've done some guest lectures in sports marketing classes at a couple of colleges and universities, and I think people regard, when they think of youth sports, they think back to playing U10 soccer or Little League baseball or something, and you had a couple moms and dads out there, you know, helping to coach one thing and another. What you don't realize from a business point of view is the impact of dealing with, in our case, 325,000 young people tied in through football and cheerleading. Rick has actually visited. We do our Pop Warner Super Bowl and National Cheer and Dance Championships at the Wide World of Sports Complex. Yeah, got it right, at Disney World. This year we had almost 11,000 boys and girls competing and participating over 8 days. In a business sense, what that translates to is we ran through about 27 or 28,000 hotel room nights. We generated something in north of 75,000 day park passes at the Disney parks. Disney's great that way. They arrange all the transportation. They actually closed one of the theme parks that Wednesday night. We have a private party for 15,000 of our closest friends. So it is big business in itself, but in a very different scale. And all of our football games are now live streamed on ESPN3. One is shown live on ESPN2. All the cheerleading is now streamed. So the business advantage of that, and Tony knows far more about this than I do, but you actually get to see the minutes consumed online from those shows. And again, it becomes a whole lot bigger than most people think within youth sports.
John, you're running a league, you're running a business, you're running an asset, you are developing a brand. The brand is, your aspect of the brand has sustained and survived and thrived amidst some admitted controversy for the industry generally. But you do it all. What is the secret sauce from your perspective on being able to do it all? And you didn't sleep at a Holiday Inn Express last night.
No, I'm local enough. It's interesting thinking about the numbers, and this is not atypical in youth sports organizations and more or less single sports organizations like Pony Baseball, Babe Ruth, and Pop Warner. I mentioned we have 325,000 young participants. We have about 40,000 adult volunteers who make all those programs run. Our national staff is 7 of us. So there's just a tremendous necessity for wearing a lot of hats. When I started at Pop Warner, there were only 3 of us. So you get dragged into a lot of things that you could say, this was not part of the job description. This was, not on my resume. I was not looking to do this, but just have to dig in and get the job done, doing whatever it takes, as has been set up here. There's no part of it that is too menial to get involved, roll up your sleeves and get involved in. We've had great help along the way. And you think about a staff of 7 putting on an event for 11,000 participants and about 24,000 people total. It's pretty impressive.
So your world of Pop Warner, you deal with relationships all the time. Relationships with the NFL, corporate sponsors, insurance companies, a whole bunch of people. How important are relationships in your world?
Absolutely vital. And as Tony was speaking, one of the first things I tell younger people looking to get into sports, you say, there's a lot of entry-level jobs are in sales, and people say, oh, I don't want to go in sales. And to Tony's point a minute ago, the first thing you have to do is sell yourself. You've got to sell yourself to whoever may be looking to hire you. If you don't do that, you'll never get your foot in the door. But you have to be ready within the sports world, as has been mentioned, to work your way up the ladder, because there's a lot more supply than there is demand. There are lots of jobs out there, but how do you separate yourself from a lot of people who just think, oh, well, I like sports, so I probably ought to go into the sports business. There's a lot of that. You have to be, top of things. There's things that, in hindsight, I would have changed about, if I'd had the opportunity to major in sports, would have done somewhat differently. But we're fortunate in the sense that Pop Warner, we are now 90 years old. We are the recognized name in youth football and cheerleading, and that certainly helps. But that you can lose credibility a lot faster than how you gain it. That's for sure.
Words to live by, and we'll return before the end of the panel to kind of advice, and you guys get at the end of this as much time as you want to do some Q&A of these folks and any of us who want to, if you want to get some ideas about how to survive and thrive in the business should you choose to take this path. Let's talk generally about some industry things and get all of their reactions. First, as you've progressed through the sports industry, what has been the one thing that's evolved most from the beginning of your career to today, from a sport business perspective? Mr. Commissioner?
Yeah. I would say the consumer, and the consumer continues to evolve. So today, and I have to give credit to the great president of Turner Sports, David Levy, who's a dear friend. There are three consumers today. Like you mentioned them earlier, you touched on it. There's cord cutters, cord shavers, but really, there's cord nevers. Yeah. And the cord nevers are the next generation coming through the pipeline that are really interesting to me. And over the course of my 26 years now in the business, there's one thing you can absolutely count on, and that is there's a new generation coming behind the current one sitting in your arena or watching you on TV. And Tony made a point earlier, how do you engage that new consumer? How do you learn about that new consumer, what they want, how they want it? Because you got to deliver it to them. So that's, I think, one thing for sure, constant. We're gonna see the next generation coming through, because sports entertainment, for that matter, is socioeconomic. It's not a 24-month return on investment business model of a widget that you make. It's socioeconomic.
As you progress through your careers, you'll see how important Nick's comment is, and it's more prophetic every year. Before I get to Tony, do any of you know what a television is? Have any of you seen television? By the way, you think that's funny? 5 years from now, I'm going to ask the same question and see if people really know. Yeah, I know what a television is, right? It's this little thing. How do you old people watch that big thing? And what is Bonanza anyway? Is it right? Right, exactly. Tony, perspective on that evolution.
It to me, which leads to the consumer piece, is technology. With the beginnings of the satellite television to then the internet, and to now, the streaming, and everything keeps broadening out and slicing. It's also been something that has fueled the rights fees. So when the networks were starting to say to NFL, NBA, MLB, we can't really afford the rights to go up, then nicely ESPN comes around and Turner comes around with David Levy. And then you start to have, now there's, Amazon and Facebook and Twitter and the Zone and streaming things. So technology keeps feeding the revenue stream, right? So it keeps expanding and it keeps giving us choice. So that's probably in the last 10 years, it has been one of the most dramatic things of the business, which is making it more personal to us and sort of chopping that pie. Also, we were talking earlier that, if you took the Phillies when I first started, there were maybe 30 games on the over-the-air station. Now all 162 games. So more, not only more choice, but more volume, which makes it also tough for all of us to keep up with as well.
Sir, John?
A little different perspective coming from the youth sports end of things, but it does tie back into consumerism. I think the biggest change that I've seen really stems from parents these days. It used to be that, we wanted to recruit kids to play in the programs. Parents wanted their kids to play youth sports, whatever the sport may be. In today's world, we have a tremendous percentage of parents of young people who are, a sports psychologist friend of mine used the phrase, emotionally over-invested in their children. They are so fearful of anything negative happening to their child or any possible injury that you have fewer kids participating in organized youth sports than in the past. At the same time, there's a greater emphasis on sports specialization at younger and younger ages, which leads to physical injuries and burnout. But it does, the interesting part of consumerism is they still want to be part of that world. They want to consume, whether it's online, whether it's on TV, whether it's at events, they still want to be part of it, but they're very fearful of letting their child actually participate. And I have a more sociological issue. I don't want participation in sports to become more like the Romans and the gladiators. You have the people who are there participating versus the people who would never participate but love spectating.
Good perspective on that, and kind of to tie into that as a rebound. Do we, one of the questions that you guys had put to us, and I think it was really good. What are some of the trends that you notice in the sports industry that nobody's really focusing on, that nobody's talking about, that might become big issues in the future? Nick, I'll let you handle that one. It's a tough one.
I think people are starting to focus on the fact that this new consumer, the Gen Z, millennial population that is now entering into its earning years and spending money on TV or tickets or jerseys or licensed merchandise or sponsored products. I think the demand for providing the experience in sports entertainment has changed, and you need to up your game, whereas us older people, we may just have bought a ticket and gone to a game and we're satisfied with that and had a cold beer and a hot dog and that's a great night out. What we're finding is the new consumer today is more demanding. They don't want to just go to the game and watch it. They want to be part of it. The audience wants to be part of it. And you're seeing, the NBA, I think, does a fantastic job of this and is really beginning to think about the integration of the fan actually on the court during warm-ups, right? And finding an entitlement sponsor to that and integrating that. These things are televisions, but they're also communication devices where sports betting and fan engagement with the brand and the competition on the field becomes a part of the viewing experience. So I think teams and leagues are beginning to think about it. Some of us more than others are putting it to the forefront of our strategy. But this new consumer, they don't want to just go to a game and watch it. They want to be part of it. And that could mean anything. What does that mean? That could mean, taking free throw warm-ups with LeBron before the game, right? Or just doing a selfie in the stands and being part of a contest or something. But I think that's an area that's going to be big.
And Tony, part of that discussion too is that, all the kind of quick responses among marketing subcommittees with teams and leagues is we can't guarantee our team's going to win every night, but we're striving to make sure that everybody's going to have fun and come back. So from your perspective as a corporate marketing guy, what are some of the maybe subtle changes that people will see over a little bit of time that corporations will love because the fans will see it as being very important as well?
Yeah, I think, as Nick said, the experience, you want a day out, you want a night out, so that it is important to go to the game, but are there other experiences that will still make the money you're spending and the effort you're spending still fun? What's the broader social element beyond the game itself? And it's going to take leagues to understand that that's okay. The toughest thing for any brand is to understand they say with crisis management, it's you're better in crisis management to avoid the crisis before it happens, and then you have to manage it. So to be talking to your consumer, understanding through research and through observation what's going on, what are going to be the things that are interesting. I think the broadcasts are going to change. If you even go back when David Hill was head of Fox Sports, the things he did with NASCAR and baseball, he's the one that started, putting the camera on the face of the fan more and doing the close-ups and really changing it. So now, we're already seeing it with, with ESPN, there's 6 things going on with the news and things below the line and breaking news and all these things, but we're all sort of used to it, you know, and we want to just keep feeding us this information. So, so it's, and the other big thing, which I think leagues and teams don't do a good enough job of, and marketers, is we need to understand that our country is evolving. A third of our country is Latino, African American, or Asian, right? That's a third of the country, and the Latino and Asian markets particularly are growing at a higher rate than the others. So what are you doing as a marketer to understand a third of your population growth, right? The LGBTQ community is important, and they're looking for people to say, are you sensitive to what we're about, right? So if you're a team, a league, or a brand, you want to see if people are relating to you, not the masses, but to you individually, and where that connection is. And that's going to be really important as we go forward.
An important connection back to that, obviously, very important point. We'll return to the whole minority and women in leadership position issue in a second. But John, you're kind of the subtlety that's brought up with you having a pulse on not only the kids but the parents. Is it something also that that people will go to games and not go to games a lot more these days based on whether their perception of athletes as role models, or the game's too violent, are there social messages that the game should be sending, or athletes being paid too much? Are those messages, do they resonate at the box office as well, or are they just kind of color that people talk about and don't matter?
I think there is a certain degree of that resonating. I think certainly there's some perceptions about the salaries and other things when you look at major college football programs that can't fill their student sections or have them leave at halftime. It's not that they're not consuming, but they're not consuming in person. They're consuming on their phone or on their laptop or their iPad or whatever. So I think it's changing a great deal in that sense. And again, as I mentioned, I think the parents and the kids still want to be involved. They want the experience. They want to wear the licensed merchandise. But how do you make that direct connection, and how do you maintain that interest?
Let's, Nick, respond to Tony's point about minorities and women as well. You've got a league that's growing and ever expanding, and will be in the pantheon of Major League Sports for years to come. How do you make sure that your staff, your fans, your owners represent the country at large, ethnically, gender-wise, etc.?
Great question. Pretty simple answer. Ask them.
Yeah.
Ask your consumer. Little bit of practical advice. Ask your customer what he or she wants. Make it for them. Price it right. Odds are they're probably going to buy it. So this is going to be a little pitch for turnkey intelligence, but the information is where the gold is. Having the information from the consumer, understanding, and the broad consumer, right? So whether it's African American or Asian or Latino or parsed by age or parsed by gender, I mean, all those things are really important, but understand the consumer, understand who's sitting in your venue, or understand, more importantly, who you want to sit in your venue in order to go after them and market to them. So I think the customer sometimes gets lost in all of this, and we get tied into analytics, abyss of analytics, but there's really important gold, I'll say, in that data to understand your fan, understand who he, she is and what they want, and then price it right, and your odds of selling it to them are going to go up.
Not far afield, it's connected. Let me do it with Tony, because he's, again, has the pulse on the corporate community. Philanthropic spending has increased $12 billion over the last 5 years for corporations, and judging from personal experience with some corporate leaders who are involved in sponsorships now, and they never were before, I think there's probably less reliance on the traditional, what does it mean to ROI, but how can I do the right thing? and Nick's comment about getting feedback from people about what they want. Sometimes they'll want people to do the right thing or hire the right mix, et cetera, et cetera. Tony, how do you go about assessing today the whole philanthropic world, and when you were dealing with AB, how do you do the right thing and make sure that it's consistent and growing all the time?
Well, there's sort of a saying is, doing the right thing is good business. And, but it has to also be authentic. I mean, all the research that I've seen says if a marketer ties into social or charitable functions, whether it's, various cancer programs or whatever, is your thing of choice, the consumer, again, you're talking to someone who that's important to. So whether it's something at night, whether it's a run, whether it's a walk, it's something just in your offices. Wonderful.
Shameless pitch.
Yeah, no. And so that's really important, and, and it does get rewarded. At the time at Anheuser-Busch, we realized that to a lot of people, beer, if misused, was not really the right thing to do, right? And so programs like Don't Drink and Drive and, underage drinking, we were involved with, we recycled all the aluminum plus that we ever used in cans. We were really trying to do an environmental thing. We didn't talk a lot about it because we didn't want it to look like it was a marketing scheme, but people figure it out. I'll tell a quick anecdote, which is a little bigger than a marketer. When Adam Silver, and I used this in the classroom, and then I was able to talk to Adam about this because I said I'm using you as an example as sort of the poster child of doing things right. 3 months into him being commissioner, he had the Donald Sterling situation. And in 3 days, he made his decision in getting input, right? So he got input from everybody he could to make the decision to remove Donald Sterling from the league, right? He had a lot of social backing with that as well. Before that time, and after the 2008 crash, it was very difficult to sell an NBA team. Rick probably knows a little bit about that. Some owners had used their team as leverage through the financial crisis, et cetera. Once they did the right thing with Sterling, when Ballmer came in and paid $2 billion for the Clippers, the next day, the Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, Morgan Stanley were calling Adam to say, I had people wanting to buy an NBA team. So it's sort of an example, that by doing the right thing, he increased the value of his teams by 5-fold. And you see their actions every day. If you really want to watch an example of a league, notwithstanding the NLL here, and Pop Warner, but of how with that public eye they do the right things and get that reward. I think the NBA is one of the examples you can look at.
There's room for more than one league with your
Yeah.
you're flanked by those guys. How's that? And by the way, Nick was, I don't know if you knew this, but Nick was the executive of the year twice in 1999 and 2000 with Major League Soccer, which was incredible. I left it out of your earlier bio, and I don't want to be punched by you, so it was like really very important. Give me your perspective on corporate philanthropy. Your issue is interesting because you're growing a league. You are daily doing things that other leagues did years ago only because you're playing catch up. You're smaller. That's all. So I guess you could ask it cynically by saying, do you have time for philanthropy, and then how do you make time?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I completely agree with what Tony said, and a huge fan of Adam Silver over the years, and love what the NBA stands for and what he particularly stands for. So he's a great example in the business of when you do good things, you get rewarded. But you're never too busy for doing the right thing and being authentic and true. The National Lacrosse League, we're finishing up our 33rd year, believe it or not. I call the National Lacrosse League our 33-year-old startup business because for 30 of those 33 years, the league just kind of existed. But now we're growing tremendously, and Philanthropy is a big part of it. So we're putting in place initiatives to support what our fans care about. 20% of the players in our league are native North Americans. Very unique to our sport. Lacrosse is an endemic sport, truly North American. Our version of it is Canadian, so we have initiatives and programs for native North American children who want to play in sports and making sports more available, particularly lacrosse. And then we're also heavily investing in cancer research and cures for cancer. So those are really important things. I think you have to find time for that because in the sports is a community-based asset. Each of the teams and ultimately the league is only as strong as its individual teams in those communities. And if you're part of the fabric of the community, you have to do the right thing. In this town, I built a soccer stadium in the poorest city in Pennsylvania, in Chester. And the outfall of that was we created a lot of jobs for people in that city, and we created a beautiful stadium on the river in Delaware. But a lot of it could be said, you know, why did you build it there? Because it was the right thing to do.
Right, and that kind of says it all. Let me get one final set of comments from folks, and I want to open up to questions a little earlier because this panel is one in a million. We want to, John, I'll start with you. Reflect back on kind of your career, your one proudest moment. It's a compound question, so get out your pad. One proudest moment, and then what do you think is the skill that you most should have or could have emphasized or focused on in college or early in your career that you didn't get a chance to do, and if you had to do it over again, you would have. And then your final bit of advice for these for the wonderful students at the LeBeau College of Business Sport Management at Drexel.
I think kind of a compound answer to the first part of that. Having mentioned earlier that I was a big brother, true big brother, big sister for a number of years, and I coached. I miss the hands-on involvement with young people. At the same time, it gives me great pride to feel like I am a big brother to 325,000 young people. And I think one of the proudest things I've done is with our Academic All-American program. We recognize thousands of kids each year, but we've given almost $2 million in college scholarship funds to outstanding students in Pop Warner, of which all of us are very proud. I think in hindsight, the one thing I probably would have done is go to law school. My wife says I spend my life getting sued, which is really unfortunate when you think about what you're trying to do in youth sports. And a lot of them are, not the obvious things, but you're discriminating against my child because of this or whatever. I mean, some of them are truly bizarre. But I think as far as my advice to young people is get out there, build your network. Our son is just a couple years older than you, graduated from college a year ago, and he knows, because I've pounded into his head since he was a little kid, build your network. You look at this situation, Rick and I have known each other for a number of years. Nick and I have met. Tony and I have not met until today. But Joe Favorito, we've talked on the phone. Gentleman we use for our PR worked for Joe years ago. The business of sports is, on the one hand, very large. On the other hand, a very small universe. Build the network, get out there, do internships, do whatever you can over the summer. Build your brand and your network.
Tony, I'll recap. Proudest, what you missed, and advice.
The proudest is that at Anheuser-Busch, we did not have contracts as employees, and it was day at a time. And so to last anywhere for 26 years, much less in a high profile, sort of one day at a time, to me teaches a lot of lessons of how you just go about the job and do the work, and the rest will fall into place. And so that taught me that lesson. The other thing is, and I believe in it a lot, we've talked about it, is you own you. You own your career. I wish someone had told me that somewhat early on. I had someone in an ad agency who thought I was sort of too nice, and that I thought, you know, it would just take care of itself. Little did he know the monster he would create. But it was, you know, no one's waking up every morning saying, you know, I need to make Rick's life better today. You're just not. And so you have to take ownership of your career, find ways to sometimes promote yourself in the right way, and be true to yourself. To this day, 10 years later, if I see a commissioner or a team owner or a broadcaster, is what we were known for is that we didn't abuse the privilege of spending $500 million a year. It was sort of that we knew what we were doing, we did our homework, but we did it fairly, and we were partners. The teams were not vendors or competition or someone on the other side of the desk. They were partners because they could do business with somebody else, the beer company, what have you. And so you want to build real partnerships. And the great line that started with the very beginning of the company, Adolphus Busch gave out these little penknives and said, making friends is our business. And that was the mantra of that company. And for me, that still resonates even today as I work at Turnkey Intel, working with clients, because a lot of people are smart. At the end of the day, people want to work with people that they want to spend time with. And that's the thing you want to keep thinking about.
Here, and you owe me a beer a couple of weeks from now when I'm in New York, part as a deal. Nick Sikevich gets the last official panelist word on the panel.
So proudest moment, clearly being part of building a soccer league for the next generation of players. I was a player that didn't make any money playing soccer. We built a great league over a long period of time, and that league is here to stay. Thanks to great partners like Anheuser-Busch in the early days. No truer words too, by the way, Tony. That you walk the walk on that one, or walk the talk. So that's probably my proudest achievement. You know, building the stadiums, of course, is part of that. But that was great, and I don't miss anything but the people. So I've surrounded myself with some of them to build another great league in the National Lacrosse League. So excited about doing the same thing for the NLL, or being part of that ride, building a new sport of a new generation of kids growing up in North America.
Nick Sikevich, Tony Ponturo, and John Butler are 3 of 110 panelists, but 3 of my best friends. Would like to really thank them for being part of this as well. And just to conclude before we do Q&A, this industry has endured from interesting early beginnings and rocky, uncertain steps to a point where everybody wants to be in it, everybody wants to participate in it. But when you take a look at enduring principles, this took about 5 years to do, and it was herding cats, and 18 steps up and 16 back, and ultimately the reason why everybody committed was that they liked a little bit the idea of me getting off their case and stop calling. But more important than that was that, maybe true, of course it is true, but the bottom line was that they wanted to leave an imprint and a legacy for the next generation. And if you take a look at not just the epilogue, but the comments that everybody made, echoed by these panelists, and I suspect the other 102 as we go through the next 3 years of touring, just listen to some of the words. Character, credibility, creativity, preparation, humility, passion, urgency, collaboration, perspective, resilience, flexibility, and maybe the most interesting and enduring word is vision. Here's to the dreamers in all of us that started this business, that perpetuated this business, and to take it to its next 50 years I personally can't wait for the next 50 years. I will die in a bar fight long before then, but I guarantee you that the legacy that's left from people like those on this panel and others will help define the business for years to come. Thanks to Drexel University Sport Management at LeBeau College of Business for truly launching something that will be exemplary in the next few years. Thank you all of you for attending. Thank you all of you for watching. See you next time. All right, now the R-rated questions, since the screaming is over. No R-rated questions, but let's make this informal. You know, these guys have a lot of, we collectively have over 310 years of experience in the business, maybe. Is that right?
You have 300.
I don't even know what the, get out your abacus. But, and we're all anxious to, you know, give you some specific advice other than what we've already told you. And I know you all are, some of you have already embarked on your careers, and some of you are on the cusp. So just, what are you doing? What are you looking at? What are you, you know, what are you trying to focus on, general versus specific? All of those questions. Somebody start. Yeah.
My name is Scott Blacksburg. I'm a third year studying finance. Into my last call at Goldman Sachs doing private wealth management. During that time period, I got a lot into the sports side of things as well, since we had some clients that were sports people. So I've been looking for a way to combine private wealth management and creating a brand for sports players off the field. It seems to me like there's not too many people currently doing this. I was wondering what advice you had for that specific niche, and what the best way would be to motivate these players that you're having these interactions with to want to form a brand off the field, since not so many people might know them in that area.
Any one of you take it, but I would first say, I want your business card because we're all going to be working for you.
Sounds like he's got a business card.
He's got a business already. What do you need from us, man? No, go ahead. Somebody.
Well, I think, you know, it's a conversation with the athlete and their agents. You know, agents sometimes can be tricky folks, right? But, you know, these young players need to understand, first of all, their careers are going to be very short. And so how do they take advantage of that and project that brand that someone's going to want to spend time with, either from a commercial standpoint, as a marketer, or in another business, you know, that they end up wanting to do. And so it's sort of trying to get the real conversation, because if we're sort of being honest, a really premier athlete has probably been spoiled from the time they've been playing Pop Warner, right? And so they're not used to being told anything that is against the me. So it's going to take, you know, mano a mano to say, you know, if you want to have, you know, money 10 years from now and develop a livelihood, you know, the reason we kid, but as you get older, you want to continue to keep contributing, right? You want to keep doing, you know, we're all going to live longer, and so it's about doing more, living your life in a productive way. And so for these athletes, they need to understand that, you know, when they're 30, there's another 50 years left. So it's going to take that kind of conversation.
And it's relationships too. And Nick's never been an agent, but he's been on both sides. John wouldn't be an agent. I was asked for, I'll leave it out, but it's kind of a cool color story. For 3 years of my life, I worked with Jack Nicklaus. Those of you who've seen my golf game, I actually helped him win the Masters. I improved his putt. No, I didn't do that. But don't even do it.
I've seen him play golf.
Yeah, he had. That's why we tell. But he started Golden Bear Sports Management. It's interesting because he thought, like Mark McCormick, he would be the next guy, and why not? And wrote him a memo saying, you're just going to have to bring more than your golf game and your boat. You're going to have to tell people what they don't want to hear, including that you're going to have to earn their trust as friends and mentors. It wasn't the right personality fit, but it got me a little bit into the mindset. And as much as you want to be an expert, you've got to be able to tell people who are making a lot more money than you that you've got to do some things that they don't want to do. But you're armed with statistics. Was it 73% of the NBA players 5 years ago and before went bankrupt within 7 years? That's a pretty powerful statistic. And of course, those people will say, well, that's not going to happen to me. But it does. So, part of it is, do you align with a big firm? Do you get more mature on paper very quickly? But there is obviously the need for your expertise. And I do think that part of the reason why you say it doesn't happen a lot is because it happens quietly. There are a lot of the companies, the investment banks that have private wealth divisions that focus not almost solely, but in large part on pro athletes. And they're very protective about the names and the relationships because they don't want them stolen. Plus, those athletes treat the relationships as confidential client relationships too. It doesn't mean it's not a good idea, right?
No, actually, I think he's onto something, because the athlete today, especially in the higher profile sports, is become a major brand. And in some cases, we're seeing those athletes become, more influential than the teams they play for. And so I think you're onto a cottage industry that's forming within the sports business. But to Rick's point about relationships, athletes are athletes. I was one of them. And trust and relationship is the starting point. And you've got to be able to assert that very quickly, because especially, a LeBron, for example, everybody wants his money, right? So who's he trust?
The recruiting game is so difficult, and it's so much fun to see it on the outside. And I made a strategic career decision early on that my consulting work would be on the management side, and I would never formally register as an agent. And it served me well, because you always have to reach the devil's decision on what you pay an athlete up front, because everybody does it, whether you like it or not. And there is that trust in those relationships, and you've got to be a friend, and you got to earn that trust over time. Those State Farm commercials, you really now believe that Chris Paul and those character actors really love each other now. It's kind of fun until you realize it's business. And at what point are you sincere about, well, here's the $300,000 that every athlete gets in order to be recruited by that certain firm, unfortunately, like it or not, and I want you to be a friend and want you to listen. It's a very, very, very difficult dynamic. Made even more difficult now because, LeBron James and his group of people at that level run the world, and everybody else is subservient to them in some ways. Yeah.
For you, Nick, you said that one of the most recent trends is fans being more interactive with the game. How do you guys do with the National Lacrosse League? You guys are still growing. What kind of strategies and ideas are you guys using to have your fans be more interactive while they attend that game?
Yeah, well, and we're investing in technology to help service that. I think Rick alluded to it earlier. We're a 33-year-old startup, and we're playing catch up to what the other leagues are doing. But technology is a big piece of it. So, everything from the basics of, stats information of the performance on the floor to consumer analytics. We're building all of that really from scratch and have been doing that the last 3 years. We're not there yet. We still have more to go. There's the whole advent of sports betting, and while there's only a handful of states where it's legal in, it's an inevitability that pretty much every state in the United States. We have 5 teams in Canada. Sports betting is legal in Canada. So we have to play catch up there, not just on the marketing side of it or the revenue side of it, but the integrity side of it. We have no systems in place to manage the integrity of our game. So with that coming online, we have to invest heavily. The first thing we did, which was actually in hindsight the smartest thing, was we invested millions of dollars into an over-the-top streaming platform and decided that the way to market the National Lacrosse League is going to be digital and digital only. And we built NLL TV. 2 years later, we sold our rights to Turner because of their vision on where OTT was going, and now we're a premium property on their BR live stream. And but we have to continue to invest in that technology. So I think Tony mentioned it earlier about the juxtaposition of technology with the consumer is going to be so vital in getting it right going forward.
This is not just a mindless, gratuitous appeal for strokes on the golf course. This is a comment that you ought to take seriously. Nick has an incredibly difficult job. He didn't say it, I did. So for 30 years of malaise may not be the word, just lack of momentum, he takes over a league and he refers to it as a startup, but you make all of these innovative, life-changing technological decisions. When you just heard him say TV versus digital, he minimized it. Well, you make the wrong decision and you're done. And so you've got to herd old cats, new cats, rich cats, poor cats, a whole bunch of different kind of cats, and you grow a league that is struggling for relevance in a world where there is a group of hardcore lacrosse fans, but there's also a secondary group of people that want entertainment, that want to see sports. You got to appeal to all of those people, and I know him well enough to know that 24/7 is not enough time in the day. So just to give you some perspective, in case you're thinking of career choices, I'll give you his home number later.
In terms of like for the National Lacrosse League, is there knowledge sharing at all with the other leagues? Like, do you call the other commissioners, talk about best practices? Is that something that occurs, or do you guys feel like you're competitors?
No, so, some are a little more open to that than others. You know, we have 5 NHL teams, owners. We have 5 NHL owners, 2 NFL owners, 1 Major League Soccer owner, and 2 NBA owners in our league. So it kind of makes it easy to get information from our ownership on those leagues. But I mean, the relationships, commissioners talk with each other. I think it's I think it's more mental therapy with each other, because you know it's you're managing owners and fans and all of that. So you know, Don Garber, Gary Bettman, Adam Silver, they're friends and colleagues for many years. We don't share any secrets, but we share some best practices. I think it's important.
And let me add one thing too. Again, shameless plug for the book. Don Garber has a chapter. Paul Tagliabue has a chapter. Gary Bettman has a chapter. Of course, Nick. And so each of them, in their own way, talk about collaboration. And you do know that they go out and share not secrets, but you've seen it happen, and it would be silly not to, because there are a lot more commonalities than there are differences. Clearly. Yeah.
I have a question more for Mr. Butler. You talked earlier about how you're getting a lot more one sport athletes. Like something I've noticed, I played 4 sports growing up, and now I know families that have kids that want soccer. That's it. How do you both try to grow Pop Warner football, but also encourage them to play lacrosse, an upcoming sport, in a different season, knowing the risk they may stay with lacrosse and not come back? From a personal aspect, you're saying the right thing, but from a business aspect, it's got to be tough.
I laughingly say, it's kind of true, that at youth levels, football is the only one-season sport now, because everything else is year-round. And a lot of it is driven by the local coaches who run the various sports, generally for profit. They want cash flow year-round. They get the parents. Too many parents are very misinformed about the availability of athletic scholarships and think, oh, you know, when my son was playing lacrosse in high school, you'd have parents in the summer saying, oh, it's so important that he gets a lacrosse scholarship to college because we can't afford it. Well, the reality is there's only half as many D1 schools in lacrosse as there are in football. They get 12.4 scholarships for the whole program, so you get roughly 2.5 per entering class. They're recruiting 15 to 18 kids per year. So the realities of athletic scholarships are too many parents just are misinformed about it. The reality there is that for every $1 of athletic scholarship funds available, there's $150 in academic scholarship funds available. So I tell them, you know, don't hire a speed coach, hire a tutor. So the reality is we encourage kids to play multiple sports. The NFL publishes every year, and it gets very little media coverage, but this year over 95% of the NFL players drafted played multiple sports all the way through high school. Most coaches will tell you, even at high school levels and even at college levels, we're glad you're a multi-sport athlete because we believe you learn and grow by the other sports you play. You don't get the overuse injuries.
One more question, if there is one. Yes, sir.
Zeke Goldsmith. I'm a Drexel University sport management sophomore.
Okay.
On the topic of specialization, early on in your careers or even in your undergraduate education, I'm sure there's a point in each of your careers where there was a number of jumping points that you could I'm just wondering, what factors went into your choice to really pick the career line that you did?
Great question, by the way. Nick, you start.
Yeah, it's a great question. So, my choice was fortuitous because the World Cup of Soccer had come to the United States, and I was, like I said earlier, working at a credit card bank, and a dear mutual friend of ours, Alan Rothenberg and Randy Bernstein, gave me a call and said, "Hey, we're starting this soccer league." And I'm like, "Nah, I still have uncashed paychecks from soccer teams I used to play for in the 80s. I'm not interested." But then they sold me the vision and introduced me to Lamar Hunt, Robert Kraft, and Phil Anschutz at a meeting in Los Angeles. And I'm like, this is a bit of a different league than the one I played in. And, I had a passion to create a soccer league for American players that, in my generation didn't have a chance. So it was, a pay cut, actually, a pretty significant one. But I'm glad I did it because in the long haul, I did quite well financially, and we left a hell of a soccer league behind when I exited Major League Soccer.
Tony, go ahead.
My guess is you're driven by some things in your life today by your internal gut, right? Well, that will continue to serve you well. And I had an economics degree, but realized I didn't really, as I did interviews with bankers or a training job with a corporation, it just wasn't me. It just didn't feel, I always say it wasn't my people. But I love sports and I loved entertainment. So I followed sort of a vision of, well, how can I take a business mentality and take it into an arena that I love? So that was the big picture. And then you just go drive into it. And then when I was a young agency person, I was a national television media buyer. So it was very specific. So when Anheuser-Busch offered me the job to be director of media, the intrigue was, well, it was, to have a nice job in a big corporation, although, as I referenced, it wasn't that big at the time, but it was to learn the full spectrum of media and sports, not just this one specific thing. So I knew I liked to touch a lot of things, and just keep learning and absorbing. And maybe Nick and I talking earlier is that you learn that many things happen organically, right? That you're out there, you're working, you're building your foundation of experience, and then you get this tap, right? And as I said earlier, don't be afraid that if you get started somewhere and it doesn't feel like you, it's something else looks interesting to go towards that. So bottom line is, let you guide you, and to me, get as much broad experience as you can. And I'll stop on this one. I'm pretty convinced that when the head of marketing offered me a job at Anheuser-Busch, so I worked for their agency, I didn't interview a job, I didn't know there was going to be a job. What intrigued him was that I was interested in other things. So, I like the arts. I love, obviously, sports, but I was more well-rounded, right? I came from New York. I didn't live in the Midwest. So he really looked at someone that even at 30 had a broader perspective of things going on in the world than maybe someone at the time that was going to come out of their system. So being, a more rounded individual actually has value.
John? The simplest, briefest explanation is I looked at it as a way to be able to, I still say today, I'm one of the very lucky people that gets to combine avocation and vocation. I love sports. I've always been probably more interested in the administrative side of things than versus player stats and things like that ever since I was a kid. And I started wending my way that direction, and that's how I ended up where I am.
So the bet that I made with the criminal law professor and the Chief Justice coaching got me through law school, but then after clerking, went back to Miami and then worked for a law firm for about 2.5 minutes. They still have a rule in the state of Florida that is is not too jokingly called the Horrow rule, where you have to work at a law firm for 32 days before you get your moving expenses reimbursed. Guess why that happened? So I realized pretty early on that I wanted to do sports, but there was no sports. I remember the Miami Dolphins were expanded into the AFL in 1966 and then into the NFL by merger, but we didn't have any other teams. And in Miami, everybody's from somewhere else, and nobody wants to give it the political office again because they had done it in Pittsburgh or New York and everywhere else, and there's no reason to build an arena. Well, I kind of realized dauntingly that the only way that we have a business critical mass of sports law or sports business, if I wanted to stay in South Florida, was to get an arena and get franchises done, which is not too easy a decision to take and do when you're 24. We put the Miami Sports Authority together, fired by 7 different political administrations in the city of Miami and Dade County. A whole lot of stories, which we don't have time to do, but at the end of the day, we had a team that was ultimately called the Miami Heat. Ironically, the number 3 guy at the NBA, who was the expansion guy, was Gary Bettman, who is now the NHL. Talk about relationships. The defining moment there was we walked into the office with the commissioner, Ted Harrison, the owner of Carnival Cruise Lines, and David Stern. And I was bugging them enough to say, come on, you got to try to get us in. And Orlando and Minneapolis and Charlotte were the 3. And they were going to be an even number, and they had to have 3 because they were not a number at that point. So they were going to pick 3, and this was a courtesy meeting, and Harrison knew nothing about basketball, and he said, what's the price? And so I don't know if you remember what the prices were in the mid-'80s. $32.5 million for an NBA franchise. And it's comical today, right, given the $500 million. So, and there were 5 of us, including Billy Cunningham and a couple other people who were part of that Heat world. And I was the civic cheerleader and the guy that helped build the arena. And Ted Harrison said, well, Commissioner, goodbye. And he left the office. And I'm sitting there talking about the weather, and David Stern and Gary Bettman are looking at me. And Gary Bettman is saying, what are you doing making small talk? The guy who is your only reason we're meeting with you just left, so goodbye. So we sat there and talked for a couple more minutes because I'm not chasing after the guy and crossing Fifth Avenue. He came back in 7 minutes, and he said, and I quote to David Stern, well, you know, I had to leave you, but I wanted to see what the market was like, and I went across the street to see what I could buy as far as NBA franchises across the street. But I just found out there are no sales of NBA franchises anywhere else but here. So you're telling me that if I want a team in Miami, I've got to pay that exorbitant amount. Took out his checkbook, wrote a check, no terms, $32.5 million right there. And that was the day that sports in South Florida beyond the Dolphins was really born. So I can tell a lot of stories, but I figured that would be a cool story to end on. So engineer the impossible dream and get it done. Thank you all very much.